Happy 2026, everyone, and welcome to today's conversation at the Her Notebook podcast. Today, I have the honor of speaking with Sally Maslansky. Before we begin, I want to invite you all to take a slow breath in and out because what we will be talking about today is not easy to digest. Sally's story is one of extraordinary courage, perseverance, and determination. Sally today is a licensed marriage and family therapist in private practice with extensive training in interpersonal neurobiology, mindfulness-based stress reduction, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and other integrative approaches that address the mind-body connection. But most importantly, Sally is a survivor of a very traumatic experience that no child should ever have to endure. Her journey, being able to sit here today and share her story, is nothing short of remarkable. I would say it is a testament to her resilience, courage, and the mind's incredible capacity to adapt in order to survive. Sally, I'm truly honored to have you with us today. Thank you for trusting us and for being willing to sharing your story.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the invitation. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
I want to say this very openly and right from the beginning. When I read your memoir, A Brilliant Adaptation, I cried.
Mm.
The way you bring light to what happened in your childhood and the way you explain how the mind protects itself through adaptation is profoundly moving and truly brilliant.
Yes.
I want to focus today on how your therapeutic journey helped you understand what happened, how you came to make meaning of it, and what it reveals about the brain's extraordinary ability to adapt for survival. But before we dive deeper into the therapeutic and neurological challenges you faced, would you briefly share your childhood story so our listeners have some context?
Absolutely. What my book is about is that I was diagnosed in my mid to late 30s with dissociative identity disorder in 1991 when it was still called multiple personality disorder. And so the story of my childhood did not come to light until I got into therapy. So when I showed up for therapy in 1991 at the age of 37 with Dan Siegel, and one of the first questions he asked me was, we kind of were figuring out what was going on with me, and it seemed to have something to do with my childhood. So he said, what kind of childhood did you have? And I said, I had a good childhood. And he said, God, tell me about it. And I remember just sort of feeling out of body even when he asked me that. And then he asked me again, he said, Sally, can you tell me about your childhood? And I said, I don't actually remember my childhood. And he said, how do you know it was good then? Right. And so the story of my childhood unfolded within my therapy. So I can't really tell you what my childhood was like because my mind protected me from my childhood. But what unfolded within 10 years, what ended up being 10 years of therapy with Dr. Siegel, was the story of my childhood. And it involved, I was the youngest of six children, and both my parents were incredibly abusive, sexually, both of them, and emotionally and physically. It was not a good childhood on any level. It was very abusive. And I mean, that's really all I can tell you about it because I think it's one of the reasons that my book seems to be resonating with so many, because my book is not about an abusive childhood. It truly is about the healing from an abusive childhood. So I can tell you that as my memories unfolded, but it took a long time for me to really understand what my childhood was.
Yeah.
And that's what the story of my book is. But it was a horrible childhood, and it was a sexual childhood. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to point out something there because sometimes we hear of some childhood trauma that is attributed to one parent or another. But what also was striking from your story is that it was both parents.
Yeah.
And that kind of made it, I don't know, almost twice as bad.
Yeah. Well, it was,
Yeah.
yeah, it was, it was twice as bad. Yeah, but here's the thing I've never quite figured out. And I don't, and I honestly don't think about it anymore. I mean, you asked me, how did I make sense of it? And one of the things I learned early on in therapy from Dr. Siegel was that, that the making sense process for me wasn't so much about discovering why my parents were the way they were. It was understanding the impact it all had on me, right? And
Yeah.
that's what created was coming to terms with that, figuring that out, working that out in therapy is truly the healing process, right?
Yeah.
And I have no awareness in my memories of my parents being in cohorts. It wasn't like they were, I don't remember them ever together
Yeah.
in really in any way, in any way, even non-abusive. I have very little memory I don't really have feelings about connections to any of my five siblings. So it was a
Yeah.
very disconnected childhood. It was just really not a good family. It was not a good childhood. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't have contact with any of my siblings anymore and
Yeah.
haven't forever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to start with the name of your book, which is titled A Brilliant Adaptation. And I have it here and I read it. And
Thank
um,
you.
I want to say, why did you choose that phrase? And I understand from reading the memoir, but just for our listeners,
Okay.
and what does this say about how you now understand dissociation?
Okay. So first of all, it's what Dan's, when Dan, Dr. Siegel, I call him Dan now, but back then I always called him Dr.
Yeah.
Siegel. When he
In your book,
diagnosed,
you do too.
yeah, I mean, I do. It almost like has become almost a term of endearment for me, you know? So when I think of him as my therapist back then, I think of him as Dr. Siegel. When he diagnosed me, of course, he was diagnosing me with multiple personality disorder, which was very upsetting to me because, first of all, it didn't resonate with me because all I knew about that was Sybil, that movie and subsequent movies since. And so I just said, so I am. And he had assured me when I first started seeing him, because I felt like I was crazy, going crazy. He said, you're not going crazy. So when he told me I had multiple personality disorder, I was like, so I am crazy. And he said, no, Sally, I would say you're the opposite of crazy. Actually, it's a brilliant adaptation. And
Hmm.
what I will tell you is I did not pick the title. I was calling the first title I gave the book. I think the first title I gave it was Fear Without Solution, which is a term from neuroscience for what disorganized attachment is. And then I named it The Feeling of Making Sense because the process of therapy really was making sense. It was my editor and the publishing team that suggested a brilliant adaptation. And the minute I heard it, I was like, God, I can't believe I didn't think of that. I mean, it just was the perfect title. So,
Yeah.
and it truly is. And the thing I like about it, why I think it's so important, is dissociative identity disorder is so stigmatized. And even when I talk about it now as a therapist, I'm going to be 72 next month. So I have lots of experience in the world. People just don't, they're still stuck on the multiple personality aspect of it, the Sybil aspect of it, even those movies like Split and the horror movies about it, which they're all kind of horror movies.
Yeah.
Two things that I was hoping that my book will help bring to light is that it is an absolute, it's the healthiest response to a horrific childhood that any child's mind could do. And I think it's a real window into what our mind is capable of.
Yeah.
But I also find that when people hear that I had DID, most people don't connect it immediately to what happened to me to get DID. It's
Mm.
like there's almost a separation. It's not almost like I think people dissociate in a healthy, normal human way when they hear that I was abused, and especially when I say my mother, right? It just, people, it's a hard thing to take in. And I'm hoping people can start to take it in. If someone has dissociative identity disorder, and my belief, and I think more and more people in the field are believing that it's far more prevalent than anybody has ever given it credit for, that it's not because you're weird or a freak or just suddenly, have 42 heads, which is how most people think about it. It's because of severe, intense abuse early in childhood, before you could have ever done anything about it. Yeah.
Mm,
And I think it's really important not to dissociate abuse from DID. And it just doesn't seem to always gel.
interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
I mean, I know everybody knows it, but no one, it's like, it's
I
just,
think,
I think because people can't take it in, and it's one of the reasons we have so much child abuse, I think, is because no one can really fathom what it is. And I will tell you recently, in a very, not in an aggressive or misunderstanding way, but someone suggested that that I refer to something, I was writing a piece and somebody suggested that I said something about, I think I referred to the abuse as it. I think I said something like until it was over or something.
mm,
And they said, I think that you should say until the sexual violation ended. And I said, I don't think that we can say sexual violation for someone who's been sexually abused under the age of 7. I think that's more sexual violence. And
mm,
it's truly the violent aspect of what it means to be a very young child under the age of 7, to be involved in sexual violent relationships. It's unfathomable, but we've got to be a little bit more fathomable about it to
yeah,
really understand the dynamics.
yeah. It's sort of pretending it doesn't happen, but it
Yeah.
does. It did.
Well, and that's kind of what dissociation is. A DID, it's on a higher level. Yeah, this isn't happening. I'm okay. I had
Yeah.
a good childhood, Dr. Siegel. Yeah.
So I want to, just for the sake of everybody listening, I want to distinguish between that multiple personality disorder
Mhm.
and the dissociative identity disorder.
Yes.
Because I know that in the book, as you said, initially that you were diagnosed with the multiple personality
Yes.
disorder, you didn't feel it. And in the end, it ended up that wasn't the case, but it took a little bit of work to do that.
I mean, that's what it was called then. There was no
Mm,
DID then. In 1991, it was still called multiple personality disorder. And I think multiple personality disorder entered the DSM in 1980. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's the year it did. And the belief then was that it was distinct personality states, right?
okay.
And then by 1994, so just 3 years after I started working with Dr. Siegel, the DSM changed it officially to dissociative identity disorder. And the salient difference was it's not personality states, it's dissociated states, dissociated self states. So, and it's such an important distinction
Okay.
because the Sybil model, the MPD model is truly, and it seems this one is one of the biggest questions I get, and it seems to be one of the hardest things for people to integrate. And I think it's hard because this model is so big in the popular culture. It's one of the things I'm hoping I can impact with this book is, you know, I never had multiple different personalities
Hmm.
like in the movie Sybil, where I had different wardrobes, different jobs, different families, or I don't know if she had different families, but relationships that weren't connected. That was not my experience. MPD seemed to be extraordinarily externalized. My experience was very, very deeply internalized. And so the way I like to explain it, and this is Dan Siegel's explanation, is multiple personality disorder meant that the personalities were nouns, right?
Mm,
Dissociative identity disorder, what we know now is this dissociated self states, which is actually a pretty new term that Bethany Brand and Ruth Lanius in their work are really trying to get that to be the official name, not parts, not alters, but dissociated self states. And their work is amazing. Ruth Lanius and Bethany Brand. Um, Very specifically on DID. So dissociated self states, what Dan would say, are verbs, not nouns. They're actions, they're processes. And the
Mm,
way I think about it and try to explain it as simply as I can, because I'm not a researcher, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an expert, except of my own experience, is we all have multiple states of mind, right? I have a state of mind when I'm talking to you, when I'm walking with my dogs, when I was sick last week trying to get over a cold, when I was, when I'm with my kid, when I'm with friends. It's all different states of mind. When I'm swimming, when I'm working out in the gym, different states of mind. Dissociative identity disorder, I have very many different states of mind, but the distinction is that there are memory barriers between states, right? So I don't know that I have a state of mind that also can sustain being abused. I don't know that I have a my abuse state of mind doesn't know I have a state of mind that actually goes to school and can learn. The part that's getting abused doesn't know that I have a state that can sit and have breakfast or dinner with the people that are hurting me because there's memory barriers.
mm,
And so, I mean, and that to me is the salient symptom of DID are the memory barriers. And once the memory barriers start to dissolve, and certainly once they're gone, you no longer have dissociative identity disorder. You just have different states of mind. There's a coherence of a consciousness about them. Does
right.
that make sense?
Yeah, from the book, I noticed the frame disassociation of a survival strategy rather than a pathology,
Yeah.
where there are various mind states that
Yes.
are independent of each other and may not necessarily know the other exists.
Well, and the reason they don't isn't because they are different identities, it's because
Mhm.
they're protected by memory barriers. So it's all little Sally. It's all happening to little Sally,
Right.
right? It's not happening to Sally and somebody else, right? But even though there might be different names that become created, and I'm not exactly sure how that happens. I'd have to ask Dan or Bethany or Ruth of that really, which I might when we do some things together. It's that there's no memory of other states. So, and that's what makes it so difficult as you become a teenager or adolescent and then into adulthood because massively adaptive as a kid when you have no agency. But when you start to be able to get out into the world, and the way I noticed that when I look back now, the biggest sign to me that when I look back on it now, I mean, then I just thought it was normal. I had no memory of anything, right? I could have
Mm.
had a dinner with people the night before, and it's not that I didn't remember that I knew people. I always knew I knew them, but I didn't really remember that I'd seen them recently or that they had told me something really significant. Yeah.
Hmm. So, that begs the question, like, how does that the reframe under circumstances of trauma, we create these independent states that are not necessarily know of the other state.
Right.
How does that reframe change the way that we look at trauma, particularly in childhood,
Well,
right?
so one thing to know is I don't know if how this is true globally, but for me, the cause of what gave me the ability, which I think is a good thing, to create dissociative identity disorder was that I had a disorganized attachment. And everyone with disorganized attachment does not get DID, but we know it's one cause of DID. And disorganized attachment, you only get a disorganized attachment in the first 7 years of life. So if I'm 7 and I have a great childhood, and then at 10 something really horrible happens, or I even get abused, or I get buried under an earthquake, or if something horrible happens, I'm not going to develop DID.
Hmm.
Okay. I'm going to have trauma, but I'm not going to have disorganized attachment or DID. So what disorganized attachment, the simplest way to understand it is, neuroscientists call disorganized attachment fear without solution, a biological paradox. So, and what that means is, so I'm 3 years old and somebody's really hurting me. And my attachment circuitry, I always think of my attachment circuitry as being in my prefrontal cortex. My attachment circuitry is telling me to go toward my caregivers to take care of me, because that's what my attachment is. I'm hardwired to go towards the people who are taking basically in my case, my parents, to keep me safe. And my brainstem is going danger, danger, get away from the source of danger. And under 7 years of age, when the source of danger is the same as my attachment figures, my mind can't make sense of that and it fragments. That's what they call fear without solution, a biological paradox.
Mm.
I mean, it's really intense.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I need safety, but they're the people that are hurting me. What am I going to do? I'm 3.
Yeah.
I can't get in the car and drive away. I can't call the cops. Yeah.
Yeah. You need safety, and the source of your safety is the harm.
Is the harm. So you fragment if you're lucky. I mean, I really believe that if you're lucky, you fragment.
Mm.
And then you can go into the world and you can be sexually abused in your room at night and go downstairs in the morning, have breakfast, and not know that they were sexually abusing you.
Mm.
Yeah.
Sally, what misconceptions about dissociative identity disorder do you most
Yeah.
want your memoir to help dismantle?
That it's 100% normal. It is not an abnormal aberration. It is what a healthy child's mind does to stay safe. It is not pathological. It's not sociopathic. It's not a personality disorder. There's a lot of people that work in research and scientists, and a lot of people with lived experience who are people who work in the mental health field that have DID, that are trying to get that are working to have the diagnosis called, instead of dissociative identity disorder, to have it called dissociative identity response.
Mm.
Because it isn't a disorder. The disorder is the abuse, right? And it is absolutely a healthy response to the most unhealthy situation. And to me, the biggest misconception is, and this is when I never really talked about that I had DID publicly. I mean, my friends knew and stuff. I mean, a lot of my friends knew, some newer friends didn't. It just isn't something that would, come up often in conversation that I would share. But when Dan and I did a course together a few years ago, and he was doing a course on DID, and I said, I'd love to be a part of it. I'd love to talk about the work we did, because what I saw as a therapist is nobody really understood it like I did, I mean, from an interpersonal neurobiology stance. And also every therapist I ever met who found out about my connection to Dan as having been his patient, not even knowing what it was for, everybody wanted to know, what did Dan do? What does he do? How does he do therapy? Because he doesn't teach you how to do therapy. What
Mm.
he says is interpersonal neurobiology is a form of, not a form of therapy, it informs therapy. So after we did this course together, it became so clear to me. I mean, people were shocked when I would talk about it. Like, one person actually said, you must have not had a very severe case of DID, because I wasn't Sybil, because I wasn't a heroin addict with, 42 different lovers in different parts of town, and which is how it's generally portrayed. Or I wasn't crazy trying to kill people. And Bethany Brand's research talks about how one of the things she says in her research is that people with DID are far more likely to be victims of violence, not perpetrators of violence.
Mm.
It is not a
That-
pathological condition. I'm not saying that someone with DID might not develop some pathology. First of all, because it's so misunderstood, and one of the other statistics that's so alarming that I'd really like to help is that the statistics, Bethany Brand's research shows that on average, most people with DID take 7.5 to 12 years to get a diagnosis.
Mm.
And so I think about myself, right? And my entire therapy was done in 10 years.
Right.
And I think about, and a lot of people, so here's what I think. If
Mm.
I had had a therapist when I went to therapy, and they had told me that I was bipolar or crazy or just nothing, I mean, the trajectory would have been so much different for me. I think the reason one of the outcomes, I believe one of the reasons that my outcome has been so positive for me is because Dr. Siegel knew pretty quickly what was going on with me. And he met me where I was at. And there was no fear, there was no judgment, there was no pathologizing. It was just an unfolding of everything that my mind did to protect me in my childhood. And once I got into a safe environment with him, I was able to then know it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, I want to stay with that thought for 1 second, and then I want to go back to something you said earlier. But
Okay.
the therapeutic bond
Mm,
seems to be very central to your story. And
yeah.
as you said, Dr. Siegel was able to identify your situation very early on, and that seems to have sort of mapped out the course of your therapy differently from if you had been diagnosed with one of these other uh, disorders, if you will.
Yeah. Or
So,
personality disorder, which would have been a whole different approach.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to, can you talk a little bit? Why is the relationship itself such
Mhm.
a powerful agent of
Right.
healing?
Right.
Does it
So,
have, yeah.
no, go ahead. You go ahead and ask that.
No, I was gonna ask, but I don't want to put words in your mouth if it
Yeah.
has to do with the trust or the ability to feel vulnerable or like,
Yeah. All
what
of
gets
that.
you there?
You know, one of the things I see today in therapy, are that there are lots of preconceived notions about what a certain disorder looks like. And here's a strategy or a therapeutic stance that we use, and it has to almost follow a checklist. I mean, I know it's not that reduced, but there's a certain perspective about what therapy should look like and what the disorder or response should look like. Dr. Siegel never, it was never that. I don't know if he was thinking like that in his own mind, but he never, I've heard people with DID tell me that they've been told by therapists that they can't work with them unless they stop dissociating in session. Right? And things like that. I've heard lots of stories like of just being misunderstood and misattuned to. So what Dr. Siegel had, because he knows how the mind works, right? He understands neuroscience and he understands. Can I just read one thing out of his
Yeah,
foreword, which I think
yeah.
answers this? I think it's short. Okay. So what he says in his foreword is, okay, this unique offering, my book, reveals how our minds are shaped by our relationships. Right, and we know that's what neuroplasticity is, right? Okay. So this unique offering reveals how our minds are shaped by our relationships, the traumatic ones early in life, leading to a fracturing in how our emotions, thoughts, memories, and even sense of self can become disconnected as a dissociative identity. This powerful adaptation of dividing the mind in order to conquer an overwhelming family experience also remains open to growth and change through the healing power of relationships. So
Mm.
it's the very thing that harmed me, relationships, that was able to heal me. So he was able to harness the power of neuroplasticity through an extremely safe, positive, boundaried relationship
Right.
that I came to feel completely safe in, so that all the things that I was terrified of, which were these dissociated self states that were all created as children, and so they were terrified, right? They were living in terror, these states of mind. And that's what I came to therapy with, was terror. And I made no sense. My life wasn't scary. And it was
For
able to unfold.
So for trauma survivors
Mhm.
who are struggling to trust their therapist,
Yeah.
what helps build a sense of
Okay.
safety in that space?
So what I would say is that's the responsibility of the therapist, not the
Mm,
patient, right? So if I'm a therapist and I'm afraid of someone with dissociative identity disorder, because I really think it's multiple personality disorder and I don't have a good understanding of it, or of the underpinnings of it, which is horrible abuse, right? If I'm afraid of it or don't really understand it, there's not going to be a safe environment for that person to start to feel safe and let it unfold. If I'm orchestrating how they can unfold in my office,
Yeah.
it's, do you know, it's like attachment. And this is my opinion. This is not, I mean, again, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a scientist, but one of the most robust predictors that comes out of attachment research, one of the most robust predictors of how children are going to do in life, right? How they're going to grow up to thrive emotionally, not just survive, is the degree to which that child's parents or caregivers have made sense of their own life story. Right?
Yeah, that's a very interesting
I
statistic.
mean, it's really amazing, right? So think about it from a therapeutic stance. If I'm a therapist and I haven't dealt with my own history of trauma and I get this incredibly traumatized patient and I'm unaware of my own stuff, it's going to be very difficult for me to deal with that. So truly, therapists need to deal with their own trauma histories
Yeah.
in order to be really competent therapists. And I'm not saying that, I mean, it's a lifelong thing. So there's an awareness. We may not always know, but once we have an awareness, like, so if I'm in with a client and and the client's information is frightening me, and if it's not truly a massive threat to me in the moment, if they're, then I've got to be able to learn how to discern the difference between what's my stuff and what's their stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, we did a couple of episodes on neuroplasticity, so I
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit more about that. So we know neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize, adapt, and create these new neural connections
Yeah.
throughout life in response to experiences, learning, environmental changes, whatnot.
Mhm.
It suggests, I think, that the brain can adapt and rewire, right?
To the day we die, our
Yeah,
brain is always adapting. If we're unaware of it, then we're going to start adapting in ways that might not be good for us.
yeah. So I
Right?
wanted to ask you, in your experience, how did the healing reshape that
Mhm.
internal world
Yeah.
over time?
Right. Okay, I'm going to try to think of an example. I'll give you an example from the book, okay? It happened quite a few times in over the course of my therapy. I would be filled with terror. Terror is what sent me to therapy. I adopted my son from a Romanian orphanage, and my husband and I. And from the minute we got to Romania, I started getting filled with this sense of terror. And it made no sense. I mean, my life was not, it was like the best time in my life. We just adopted this boy. I was very happy and I was filled with this feeling. So I ended up going to Dr. Siegel and talking about it. And I think that's what, I don't know for sure, but I think that's what indicated to him this must be about my childhood. I don't think he had any idea at first what it was, but that
Mm,
it made no sense that I had this level of fear because there was nothing wrong with my son. And Dan had assessed Sam when we first brought him home from Romania, and Dan knew he was doing fine, right? There was no threat in my life, yet I was terrified, right? So Dan created an atmosphere of absolute safety. I could go into his office and I could say nothing. I could go into his office and cry. I could go in and talk about whatever I needed to. He never said, "You're being resistant, you're being avoidant. I can't work with you if you can't learn to speak to me." And no, it was just he followed me where I was. And this is just always. And there, I mean, there were a few times where he was concerned about my safety, and we had to deal with that very specifically. But he never shamed me. He never directed me, right?
yeah.
Certainly never rejected me. But this is just a great example of in the moment, I think, when there was a shift. We'd had a really, really intense session where I had And when I think about the states, what I think about is it's now I know this information. I don't think of it about as, oh, all of a sudden I know about this state that this happened to. Now I know it. The memories are barriers are dissolving. Now I know that this happened to me. And it's horrible. I've just relived it in the therapy room. I've felt it. I was shaking. I was crying. And Dan said something, and I said, I don't know that I can do this work anymore. I'm terrified. And he said, well, tell me what you're feeling. And I said, "Uh, what if I'm not strong enough? What if I am unable to know what happened to me?"
Mm.
And he took a really long pause in the most loving, connected way a therapist can in the room. And he said, Sally, you have already survived. You survived it already. And I just was like, oh my God, that's neuroplasticity. He's like, oh, yes, I'm not someone who's being abused as a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
I'm 37-year-old or whatever I was then, mother of a little boy who I rescued from Romania. I have a great life. I don't have to be afraid of what happened to me in my childhood any longer. It can be upsetting and it's going to be because it's upsetting, but it doesn't have to, I don't have to be afraid of it anymore. And that's neuroplasticity. So I was no longer a person who was afraid. I could
Right.
face anything and it could be horrible and I could still feel the fear and terror of a little girl, but knew that it wasn't going to happen again. It had already
Right.
happened.
Right. That's actually very enlightening,
Yeah.
I think.
And can I just tell
Honestly.
you one other example that I think's a more
Yeah.
practical example? So when my son was about 6, so we'd had him quite a few years. I've still seen Dan, and Sam and I were walking. I picked him up from school, and we were walking through the house. We lived on the beach. We were going out to the beach, and Sam stopped dead in his tracks in our living room, and he said, "Mommy, I have to tell you something." I said, "What, honey?" He said, "It makes me cry." He said, "Mommy, sometimes I feel like I'm the loneliest little boy in the world."
Oh.
I wasn't a therapist and I had no idea what to do with that. Luckily, I saw Dan the next day or, in a couple days, whatever, and I told him, and he said, Sally, I know you and Paul, my husband, have told Sam that he's adopted. He knows that he was from Romania. You've shown him pictures and stuff, but he said, I'm pretty certain that you've never shown him the photos of the babies alone in the cribs in Romania, which were just, it was a dire situation.
Hmm.
And I said, no, I never have. He said, I think it's time for you to show him. I was like, I mean, I'm terrified that seeing those will do something horrible to him. I mean,
Yeah.
how, and Dan looked at me and he said, Sally, your 6-year-old son has just told you that sometimes he feels like the loneliest little boy in the world, and he doesn't know why, but
Mm.
you do. So your job as a parent or as my therapist is not to protect Sam from the truth of his story. It's to help him make sense of it.
Mm.
So that when he grows up, he's a grown man now. He's almost 37. He's married. He has a stepdaughter. And he said, Mom, I still, I sometimes have that awareness. Sometimes I get this, oh, I'm the loneliest little boy in the world. But he says, but I know where it comes from. So if my wife is mad at me or my boss is being a jerk or, I'm just in a bad mood, I know it's not because I'm the loneliest little person in the world. I know
Mm.
it's because I've got this leftover, that was my history, but it's not something I live with anymore.
That's so
It's,
interesting.
yeah. I mean, it's such
Yeah.
a lesson.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a very big lesson. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you also, was there a moment in therapy when you realized your brain, not just your emotions, was
Mhm.
changing?
Yes. Well, yeah, there were several. I mean, well, the first one I think was very early on, but I didn't know what it was. But when he said, "How do you know? No, how do you know your childhood was good?" And I was like, I was like, I was kind of like in a little la la land, kind of getting ready to dissociate, I'm certain. And then he said, "But how do you know it was good then?" I just was suddenly fully present. I was just like, oh my God. I don't know what's worse that I'm 37 and don't remember my childhood, or I'm 37 and never thought it was important or significant ever. I was a 37-year-old woman with very successful life, very good life. And now I was just like, oh yeah, I don't really remember my childhood, just was like,
Huh.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and then and I'll tell you one of the I mean, in therapy, like when he said, you've survived already, I really honestly feel like I could feel a shift. It's almost like, how Oprah has aha moments?
Yeah.
I would have like a little, where it was almost like a little light would go off in my head, literally. And I think that was a new neural connection being created, an electrical spark. And I'd be like, it just changed everything,
Wow.
changed
Mhm.
everything.
Hmm.
And I still get those kind of moments. We all do. We just aren't sure what they are, like, I mean, even just being a parent now of a grown son, every now and then I'm like, oh, I get worried about something. And then I'm like, and then I get this little like, no, 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 he's grown. You know what I mean? He can figure this out. I don't need to figure this out for him. I don't have to worry about this. He'll figure this out. And it is like a shift. Yeah, it's definitely a shift.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And so, from a neuroplasticity perspective, were there daily practices that helped reinforce that safety and that
Yes.
healing of the nervous system?
Yes. There were, well, in the first year, I don't know. I mean, just trying to be grounded, doing things like journaling were very
Mhm.
integrative, right? But then eventually, Dan first taught me about meditation, and then he taught me the wheel of awareness. And to this day, I do the wheel of awareness every day. And I say this to everybody. If you are a person or a therapist and you want to understand more about what interpersonal neurobiology is, learn the wheel of awareness. And Dan on his website, can I say this?
Yeah.
On his website, which is he's got mine site. It's not that one. It's drdansiegel.com. And you'll see in the doc it says Wheel of Awareness. You click it, and for free, you get access to several different versions of him talking about the Wheel of Awareness, practicing the Wheel of Awareness, explaining what it is. Absolutely free. And to me, that is a crash. And I asked him if I could say this. To me, it's like a crash course in interpersonal neurobiology because it truly is teaching you about integration across all domains of the way our nervous system works.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Wheel of Awareness? I don't know what it is, so
Yeah, so
now I'm going to go look it up.
yeah, it's incredible. It's so the wheel of awareness helps you integrate. So you're integrating you're becoming aware of your five senses. Then you become aware of the internal sensations in the body, like the muscles and bones of the body. And then you go internally, the stomach, the heart, the lungs, right? So you're becoming aware of that. And then he extends it so that you become aware of relationships, right? The people in your life, the people in your community, the people in the world, right? All living human beings. And then you have affirmation. The research of self-compassion and compassion is highly integrative in the brain. It's very important for neuroplasticity. So you do those. You can do the whole. I can do the whole thing. If I want to do the whole wheel of awareness, I can do it in about 10 minutes. But he's got like a 6-minute one, a 10-minute one, a 20-minute one. I think there's even a 30-minute one. And I could even do it in 3 minutes if I'm in a real pinch, right? But
Mm.
it promotes integration. And integration, I don't know if this is scientifically correct, but from my lived experience, integration and neuroplasticity go hand in hand.
Interesting. I'm definitely going to look at that 6-minute one.
It's an incredible tool. And he's got courses on it, on the whole courses on the Wheel of Awareness, but it's incredible.
So I wanted to ask you, I want to go back to the idea of trust.
Yeah.
From what I've read, trust is a neurological experience as much as an emotional one. How would you say that the brain learns to trust again after childhood trauma?
So again, being able to harness the power of relationships and neuroplasticity, right? Because relationships are what
Hmm.
changes our brain experience. It changes our brain. So, first of all, I think within the relationship, the therapeutic relationship is for the therapist to understand that you not trusting them has nothing to do. It's not pathology. It's not because they're saying that you're bad. It's just going to take time to not personalize it, right? It's what we've learned. But the more you can meet somebody where they're at, be fine with where they're at and not need to rush them along into being how you think it should be now. The way I think about trust is the ability that I have to know that what you tell me is true.
Mm.
So as a therapist, you have to really be honest with your clients, right? And consistent. And if you have a rupture, it needs to be repaired.
Mm. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, for those listeners that might be wondering and who are unfamiliar with this whole dissociation
Yeah.
concept, what signs would you say might suggest that someone is dissociating without even realizing it?
Yeah. When I think most people don't really, I mean, I can't say that most people don't. I certainly didn't, right?
Mm-hmm,
So,
mm-hmm.
first of all, I mean, not remembering your childhood is not necessarily a sign that you had trauma, right? Or much less that you have DID. But it's something to explore. It's something to not be afraid of and to not pathologize. So, I mean, Dan never said, "Oh, you don't remember your childhood. Well, that must mean you had some trauma, and we got to find that trauma." No, it just was an unfolding. Right?
Mm.
So you just can't assume it. But it is something to pay attention to, right?
Right.
I started being more and more aware because I was completely unaware before that I wasn't just not remembering my childhood. That, I mean, I felt out of body. I mean, the whole experience when we went to Romania to adopt Sam, literally when we landed in Romania, I started to be filled with terror.
Wow.
Now, of course, we were in a country that 6 months earlier had had a bloody revolution, and it was a horrible regime, right? It had been very scary. I mean, but it was 6 months later, and the country was in shambles. I mean, it was in really rough shape. So it wasn't that weird that I was scared, right? But it was over the top scared. I
But
mean, I
Paul, your husband, didn't feel scared.
no, because there was nothing. First of all, he didn't have that history, right?
Yeah.
And it just didn't bother him. I remember I mean, I started getting paranoid. We were at this hotel and I saw some people come out of this top floor room and I looked and there were like monitors everywhere and I said, "I think that they're eavesdropping on us." And we just spent almost a whole year in the Soviet Union because he was working there, right? And which was very scary, but I was never scared there. And he looked at me and he said, "Sally," he said, "We've been here 3 weeks and the light bulb in the elevator has never worked. Do you really think they have the equipment to be monitoring us in our rooms?" Right? I mean, he was so practical about it. And I was just like, I was terrified.
Hmm.
Right? So, and it made no sense. And when I talked to Dr. Siegel about it, it didn't make, he was trying to help me. Let's try to figure out why you were so scared. And
Hmm.
there was no reason I was to be scared there. So that's when he started asking me questions about childhood. And then so there's, I think this is in my book too. It's the making sense process, okay? And that's why I named the book originally Making Sense. Okay, so the making sense process, these are all definitions from Dan's book, Pocket Guide to Interpersonal Neurobiology. Okay, so making sense is a process of sorting through memory, here and now experience, and imagination such that we create a coherent picture of the essence of what is occurring in our lives. Making sense can be seen as an integrative process linking our past, present, and potential future in a way that enables these elements of thought, feeling, memory, and imagination to situate us in a social world of experience. So when he and I started talking, I think he became pretty quickly aware that things didn't make sense. Why are you afraid that your son who's completely healthy and thriving, that something's wrong? There wasn't something wrong. It was my internal world where something was wrong that was starting to make itself known to me. And then if you think when it says making sense can be seen as integrative, linking our past, our present, and potential future that enables the elements of thought, feeling, memory, and imagination. Well, those are all the things that were had memory barriers for me. My
Mm.
past was had memory barriers. My present, I wasn't really encoding it in any kind of way because I wasn't remembering things. My thoughts, my feelings, they were all separated. And it
Do
didn't
you,
make sense.
yeah, do you think, Sally, that if you hadn't gone through the process of adopting a son or maybe even having a child
Mhm.
yourself, that you would not have gone through this healing
I
or
think it would have, I think that it's very significant that I adopted Sam and especially under such, I had a big fantasy and that I talk about in the book as we went through therapy that I was always hoping to be rescued, right? By a father, like a really great father. And I think that I rescued Sam. Like Dan and I've talked about it. I think that's probably was the impetus. And and I actually said this to Dan, I think, once, and I don't think he agreed, but I think it's true. I think if I had given birth to a girl especially, it would have been a whole different story. And I don't think I would have killed anybody or been horribly abusive, but I think I could have tended that way, right? I think I would have gotten help, I think it would have, but might not have found Dr. Siegel. I met Dr. Siegel because we adopted Sam and I took Sam there to be assessed,
Mm.
So I mean, it all kind of worked out really well. But I think if I'd given birth to a girl like myself, I think that those awarenesses of being angry and whatever without having any awareness of where it was coming from could have been abusive. Yeah, I think it would have been a whole different trajectory.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What does wholeness mean to you now after integration?
What wholeness to me means is I have no memory barriers. I can remember everything now without it haunting me in any way.
Mm,
So I don't sit around thinking about how specifically horrific my childhood was ever. But I know I had a horrific childhood, but it's no longer a defining moment. I'm not afraid.
I see.
Yeah. And every now and then something will happen. I get that little, I'm like afraid of something. And I'm like, and the minute I realize, why am I afraid? I realize, oh, it's from the past. And it
Mm,
goes away right away. It's like an old remnant. Yeah.
mm. So healing is rarely a linear journey.
No, yes.
So how do you navigate setbacks without interpreting them
Yeah.
as failure?
Well, so setbacks within therapy.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, because Dr. Siegel never thought of it as failure ever. And I would be like, oh, failure, right?
Right.
Oh, and he was like, it's not failure, Sally. He would say, everything's information. We're moving forward. It's not failure. So when I had to be hospitalized, I was like, ugh. And then I had to be hospitalized again, and I thought, oh, I'm again being hospitalized, and I mean that's sort of that neuroplastic thing too. You would say, Sally, you're human, right? That this is something that's come up. We're dealing with it. It's not failure. It's just part of the path.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So how does one differentiate between coping and true healing?
Mm. Well, I think there's an ease with having been healed and a more of a dis-ease with coping. Now I cope with a lot of stuff, right? I'm a therapist. I'm trying to promote a book, but there is a certain ease to my life, even when things aren't going great, that I never used to have. I don't get triggered.
Mm,
I'm trying to think of an example. Not too long ago, well, it's been a few years, my son and his wife, who are completely adults, were going to go to the mountains. And they had just moved to North Carolina and they were gonna leave in the morning and but then they couldn't go till later because their daughter had to be at school for some photos or something. So they weren't gonna leave until like 4 o'clock. And when I heard that it was this time of year, I thought immediately, mom is in control here. And I was like, oh my God, it's going to be 4 o'clock. That means by 5:30 it's dark and Sam's never driven in the mountains. And I could just see him going over a cliff, right? And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's going to be so dangerous. And then I thought, oh, I know what I'll do. And this all happened very quickly. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure that to tell him to call me when they get there. And then I laughed internally, right? And I thought, oh, wait, them calling me when they get there has nothing to do with their safety. So all of this worry has nothing to do with their safety. And their job in life is not to keep me from worrying about them. So it's the ability to see things as they are instead of how I'm afraid they might be. Doesn't mean I don't still like, oh my God, what if this happens? I'm like, oh no, yeah, it might happen. But, him calling me from the hospital that they've just had a crash isn't going to keep him any safer than, if they don't call me from the hospital if they have a crash. Yeah.
That's funny. That's
Yeah.
the mom in me instinct said the same thing as you. It's
No,
like,
no,
oh,
and
the
we
sun
all
set and
have them, and they'll never go away. My son's going to be 37. I still have it, but I have a much quicker ability to disengage from to see it for what it is and laugh at myself and not be like, oh, you idiot, you're so horrible, or to make my son's life really difficult.
Mm,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
So, a separate and much more subtle aspect in your memoir, which really resonated with me, was that you often mentioned your then husband's respect for your privacy in therapy. And at one point, you wrote, I'm going to just read something here. And just as I didn't feel the need to share the complexities of therapy, Paul didn't feel the need to hear them. It
Yeah.
wasn't a secret, it was private.
Yeah.
And I think this is so important because very often family, friends, they equate not sharing
Yeah.
with secrecy. And yet it's really about privacy.
Privacy. Yeah.
And so, do you think that this is a necessary boundary for that healing process?
Well, I don't know that privacy is necessarily a necessary part of healing, but I think as honoring people's differences, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, in between two people, it's really important that we're able to honor what the other person needs. Now, I'm not saying that I need to honor that my husband's a heroin addict so he can shoot up heroin in front of me, right? But if my husband if I'm in therapy and I don't feel like it's something I want to share with him, for him to not get his feelings hurt by that is a really wonderful situation. And if he's getting his feelings hurt by it, that's his work, not mine. Because I'm not hurting his feelings. I don't need to talk about it. And most of the time, especially early on, I didn't have the words to talk about it. I mean, I would come home from sessions and I would just be like exhausted. And, I had this little boy to take care of too, right? And that was really my main focus. And Paul respected that. He understood it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really incredible.
It's sort of giving you space, is how I look
Total
at it.
space. I mean, he really understood it, and he was also, he was a very independent person anyway. I mean, it wasn't a problem. I mean, of all the problems we had in our marriage, and we ended up, eventually getting divorced, but it wasn't that we were hurting each other's feelings by not talking about everything all the time. Yeah.
And I also recall a phrase that's recurring in the memoir: truth is your friend.
Truth is your friend.
If someone listening is at the very beginning of their healing journey, what is like the first gentle truth
Yeah.
you'd want them to hear?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is almost universal that no matter what you're dealing with, we can figure it out and we can heal. And the reason I know that is because neuroplasticity, right?
Mm,
Nothing that's happened to us is meant to be a lifelong prison.
mm,
Because I had a bad childhood doesn't mean I'm destined to have a horrible life. Because I see it a lot politically right now, and it doesn't matter what our politics are, but there's a lot of really upsetting stuff going on in many different ways in our country. I have a firm belief that I'll get through it, I mean that I mean I'm hoping there's change and I'm hoping better things happen. But if I sit around all day, horrible, every day is going to be horrible. And it's not being blind, it's not looking at the world through rose-colored glass. It's truly developing equanimity, and which comes from integration and neuroplasticity and and mindful awareness practice. It's so important. Equanimity is the ability to maintain emotional calmness, especially when things aren't going well,
Mm.
right? I think this is so important. I don't really talk about this in the book, but as a therapist, as a human. So, mindful awareness practice, we now know, has an impact on the prefrontal cortex that keeps the brain more integrated, right? When the prefrontal cortex is online, that which is the human part of the brain, executive functioning, it is it's what makes us thoughtful human beings. When we don't have access to the prefrontal cortex, which is mostly when the brainstem alerts us to danger and our brain and our prefrontal cortex goes offline, we're not thoughtful human beings anymore because we don't have access to the part of our brain that helps us. We're in our brainstem and we're fight, flight, freeze, right? But one of the things mindful awareness practices, including the wheel of awareness, does is it strengthens the prefrontal cortex, right? So that we are less likely to lose access to it unless truly we're under threat. Because what the prefrontal cortex does is it helps us discern the difference between real danger and perceived danger, or emotional danger and physical danger. And without that capacity, our brainstem sends us a sign of a signal of danger, and as a parent, it can be because your teenager's looking at you and rolling their eyes, like, "What an idiot you are, mom," right? Well, if my brain's telling me that's dangerous, it's going to be a really bad situation. Whereas I could just say, "You know what, honey, I love you. It's not okay to speak to me like that, but dinner's going to be ready in 20 minutes, so I think you better get to your homework." And the kid can be like, "You're an idiot." Yeah, yeah, it must be really hard for you to think I'm an idiot, but I'm not going to punish you or hit you or scream at you because you're doing what your brain tells you to do at 16 and think I'm stupid so you can get on with your life eventually. And it
Wow.
doesn't mean that, people that are mindful never yell at their kids. We all do and get terrified. But it's that ability to come back and go, "Oh yeah, I do not have to live in this fear because it's not, I can discern the difference between what I actually need to be afraid of and what's really not fearful."
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
sense. And I wanted to go back to something in part five of the memoir, when you're doing your neuropsychology education, you mention encountering various professors that don't believe that early deprivation can be treated.
Yeah.
And, I hesitate to ask, how can patients advocate for the kind of therapeutic relationship that truly supports this kind of deep
Yeah.
healing? But you did say that it's not the patient's place, but how do we address that? What do you think, given, that
Yeah. I mean,
what? Mhm.
it's hard because when I was in school, I went to school in my 40s. I didn't get my master's until I finished therapy with Dr. Siegel. And I
Mhm.
kept waiting to be taught what I learned as a patient of his, right? About my mind, about the brain. Never happened. And that was in, the late 90s. They weren't teaching it. I live in a college town with a lot of universities around. I don't hear anybody teaching it in these universities. There might be the odd person, but there's no coursework on it. If I was if my son said he wanted to go to therapy, I would say this is what you need to look for. You need to know someone who's educated in neuroscience. You don't have to be a neuroscientist, but you have to understand neuroplasticity. I think you have to embrace mindful awareness practices. You don't have to be a Buddhist, but you have to understand the neuroscience, the neuroscientific value, if that's even a thing, of mindful awareness practices. And I think, I'm sorry, I would say you have to be aware of people like Dan Siegel and Ruth Lanius and Bethany Brand. I mean, Ruth has a new book out called Sensory Pathways to Healing from Trauma. And in my opinion, she is the world's leading expert. And Dan wrote the foreword. She's one of the leading, if not the leading expert on the impact of trauma on the brain.
Mm.
And if you don't understand the impact of trauma, that trauma has an impact on the brain, nothing, a whole lot's not going to change. You have to really be brain savvy, in my opinion, to be a competent therapist. Yeah.
Mm.
So I, as a patient, and I know it's terrible out there. I mean, insurance, and I wholly recognize that when I was seeing Dr. Siegel, who was not, the eminent, incredibly well, world-renowned therapist he is today, right? He was 34 when I started seeing him. But I knew right away I was in good hands. I mean, I never felt at risk. And it's still shocking to me that I'll talk to some not close colleagues, but I'll hear people they don't understand about neuroplasticity, or don't know that between the difference between multiple personality disorder and DID, or don't understand or don't believe mindfulness works. We know it does work. It's more than works. It's not just about being calm. It's I in fact I tell clients it's not necessarily about being all zen. It's about changing your brain in a way you want to change it. And if you don't know those things, like, and most of us have some trauma. It doesn't have to be that kind of trauma I had, but it has to be honored. And you have to have the belief, in my opinion, that it can be resolved, that you can make sense of it and move forward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very powerful.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about one more thing in your book, which was you talk about the window of tolerance. How does that work, and how might that be utilized for
Yeah.
everyday interactions?
And I think about it all the time. And actually, when you asked me, were there times that I could feel something shifting? It's with the window of tolerance.
Mm.
So the window of tolerance, I mean, when I think about it, so I have knee pain, right? But I've been cleared I don't need surgery. So I know I need to find a way to tolerate the discomfort of my knees and not call it pain anymore, right? Because it's really not pain, it's just kind of discomfort. But what I've noticed is I started favoring one leg over the other, and to the point where I wasn't using one leg. So neuroplastically, that leg's going to become not useful, right? So now I very much the window of tolerance. I'm tolerating the pain. And then I'm like, oh, it's really not pain. It's sensation. It's a little stiff, but there's nothing wrong with my knee. There's nothing wrong with my knee. The pain's in my brain, not in my knee. And I'm not saying it's not there's some stiffness. I'm almost 72. I have some arthritis, but it's not a dire situation. And sometimes I find myself going, like I just had a cold and I was in bed for a couple of days. And I was just like, oh God, I'm not going to ever be able to walk because my knees hurt because I've been in bed. And then I'm just like, no, window of tolerance, just widen the window of tolerance. It's how you have a cold. It's good to stay in bed. You've got a lot to do the following weeks. You don't want to have a cold and do a podcast. It would be impossible. So I'm taking care of myself. It's not going to ruin my knees forever.
Mm.
And then I sit with it, and I can almost, it's kind of like you just take a big deep breath
Mm.
and you can see your tolerance for things that used to not be so easily tolerated kind of just lift.
Yeah.
And so what Dan would do with me in the early days when I was like, I can't think of that, I can't do that, I can't know this, right? He'd just say, even for a second, if you just sit with it for a second, so before you start going like this, just be like, gonna be good. Okay, that was enough, and then I could practice a little bit. I could feel it, and then my body would shake, right? And then he'd say, just hold it for another 2 seconds.
Mm.
And you just expand your ability to sit with the feeling. And I'm going to tell you one other term because I know we're probably out of time, right? Are we
Yeah,
getting close?
yeah, yeah.
Okay. This is, I think, the first bit of neuroscience he taught me. And this was a moment where I did notice my brain changing with awareness, with this knowledge. And that's why psychoeducation is really important. And I'm not a researcher, I'm not a neuroscientist, so you don't have to be that as a therapist to teach your clients this. I almost teach most clients this on the first day. The difference between implicit memory and explicit memory.
Mm-hmm.
So explicit memory, when my mind retrieves an explicit memory, there's no question I'm remembering something from the past. It's like, oh yeah, that's that memory of when I went to Disneyland with Sam when he was 6 and he saw Mickey Mouse and oh my God, he was happy, right? I just remember it. I don't even have to think about it. I just know that that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
An implicit memory, when the mind retrieves an implicit memory, it does not come with a tag that says I'm remembering something. It just comes as a visceral, a behavioral response, a sensation, a mental model, and you think it's actually what is happening in the moment. So it's not the same as the unconscious or the subconscious because implicit memory, the memory is the feeling, the sensation, the perspective, whatever it is fully in conscious awareness. But that it's coming from your past is not.
Mm-hmm.
When I said, how can I have so many horrible feelings and no memory to tell me where they come from? He said, because the feelings are implicit. The feelings are your memory of childhood. It's like, oh, all this is, so my childhood was terrifying. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't tell you why or what happened, but I knew this terror is what my childhood was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So okay,
Very.
so that didn't make it easier, but it certainly made me know I wasn't losing my mind. Actually, and he would say, you're finding your mind, right? And
Right.
being, yeah,
So we are coming to the hour,
yeah.
and I do need to close. And we have a tradition at the Her Notebook podcast where we invite our guests to give our listeners practical, actionable advice. So the question for you is for listeners who feel broken or
Mm,
have experienced too much, whatever definition of their trauma is, what do you want them to understand about the brain's capacity
yeah.
to adapt and heal?
Yes. So what I would say is, first of all, I honor the pain and I understand it and it's real, right? But we all do have the superpower of neuroplasticity. And the more we understand about neuroplasticity and in its most basic form, what neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change with experience, right? So we get to choose what those experiences are, right? So if I feel like I am crazy because of my feelings, and I'm just going, you're crazy, you're crazy, you're crazy, then I'm going to create a neural network, a neural model that I'm crazy. Or if I try to keep some hope alive, I'm hoping I'll find a good therapist that can help me with this. And I'm going to truly try to keep hope alive because it's 100% possible to heal. It's not possible to erase what happened or change it. And you don't want to do that. You want to be able to resolve it
Mm,
and make sense of it. And making sense doesn't mean you have to understand, what you did that made this happen or what was wrong with them that they did that. It's starting to understand the impact of what happened on you. And that can start to help you release from it or heal from it. And it seems so basic and simple. And in a way it is, but it is not easy and it takes time.
mm,
So to be very gentle and loving, that whatever pain it is, there's a reason for it. You're not making it up,
mm.
but there is a way out. Yeah.
And on that note, I thank all our listeners for tuning in, and a very special thank you to you, Sally, for joining us today and for having the courage to share your story with the world.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a complete pleasure, and I really hope that my book is able to bring some hope to people and help them find neuroplasticity in a way that's towards a healing path, and therapists as well. Yeah.
I think it will.
Oh, thank you.
As we close, I want to thank you for joining me on the Her Notebook podcast. I hope today's conversation brought you some knowledge and sparked new insights. If you enjoyed this episode, I humbly ask that you please remember to click the subscribe button below. Until next time, keep flipping your notebook pages and embrace the journey to a healthier, happier you.